night air was thick with tension as we huddled together in the refuge of the abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. The faint glow of the moon cast long shadows across the empty streets outside, a silent reminder of the chaos that had consumed our once vibrant city. I could hear the distant rumble of military tanks as they patrolled the streets, their presence a grim testament to the severity of the situation. But even as we sought solace in the safety of our makeshift shelter, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at the edges of my mind. The military seemed to have things under control, or at least that's what they wanted us to believe. They had ushered us into the building with stern warnings to stay put until further notice, their expressions grim and determined as they disappeared into the night towards the borders. But as the hours passed and the darkness deepened, a sense of isolation settled over us like a heavy shroud. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside and the distant howl of a lone wolf in the distance. I glanced around at my friends, their faces drawn and pale in the dim light of the shelter. We had been through so much together, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. As exhaustion began to take its toll, we settled down for the night, seeking solace in the quiet comfort of sleep. But even as I closed my eyes and drifted off into the darkness, a nagging sense of unease lingered in the back of my mind, whispering of dangers unseen and horrors yet to come. It was nearly 3 hours into the night when I was jolted awake by a faint sound echoing through the darkness. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the product of a restless mind plagued by fear and uncertainty. But as the sound grew louder, I realized with a sinking feeling that it was coming from outside the shelter. Without hesitation, I rose from my bed and made my way towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared to face whatever horrors awaited me in the darkness. As I stepped outside, the cool night air washed over me like a wave, sending shivers down my spine. But what greeted me was not the sight of impending doom, but rather the unexpected sight of one of my friends sitting alone in the moonlight, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. I let out a sigh of relief as I realized that it was just him, his presence a welcome respite from the suffocating silence of the night. Without a word, I joined him, the two of us sitting side by side as we gazed up at the stars twinkling overhead. For a while, we sat in companionable silence, the weight of the world lifting from our shoulders as we shared stories and jokes, finding solace in each other's company amidst the chaos that surrounded us. But our moment of peace was short-lived, for suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the night, cutting through the silence like a knife. Without hesitation, we leapt to our feet and raced towards the source of the sound, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prepared to face whatever horrors awaited us in the darkness. As we burst into the clearing at the edge of the forest, we were met with a sight that sent a chill down my spine. There, illuminated by the pale light of the moon, stood a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was a raptor, much larger than the ones we had encountered before, its sleek black feathers ruffled by the gentle breeze as it tore into the flesh of a dead soldier with its razor-sharp claws. We stood frozen in terror as the creature turned towards us, its eyes gleaming with malice as it let out a low growl of warning. But before we could react, it turned back to its grisly meal, seemingly oblivious to our presence. With trembling hands, we turned and fled into the darkness, the sound of the creature's growls echoing in our ears as we raced towards the safety of the shelter. But even as we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the creature was stalking us through the darkness, biding its time until it could strike again. The world around us descended into chaos as we fled through the darkness, the sound of raptors tearing through flesh echoing in our ears as we raced towards the safety of the shelter. But even as we ran, I could feel the weight of impending doom bearing down on me like a heavy burden, a sense of dread that threatened to consume me whole. As we burst through the doors of the shelter, our breath ragged and our hearts pounding in our chests, we were met with a scene of utter carnage. The raptors had reached us, their sleek black forms darting through the shadows as they tore into the helpless survivors with ruthless efficiency. I felt bile rise in my throat as I surveyed the scene before me, the air thick with the stench of blood and death. Men, women, and children lay strewn across the floor, their lifeless eyes staring blankly into the distance as the raptors feasted upon their flesh. Without hesitation, I reached for the pistol at my waist, my fingers trembling as I prepared to face the horrors that lurked in the darkness. But as I pulled the trigger, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was almost out of ammunition, the weight of my mistake settling over me like a suffocating blanket. With a curse, I turned to my friends, their faces pale and drawn in the dim light of the shelter. We were outnumbered and outgunned, our only hope of survival resting on our ability to outwit the creatures that hunted us through the darkness. But even as we prepared to make our last stand, a voice cried out from the chaos, a lone figure emerging from the shadows with fear in her eyes. It was Sarah, a young woman who had sought refuge with us in the shelter, her face pale and drawn with terror as she stumbled towards us. Without hesitation, we grabbed her hand and bolted towards the forest, the sound of raptors hot on our heels as we raced towards the safety of the trees. But even as we ran, I knew that our chances of survival were slim, our only hope resting on our ability to outsmart the creatures that pursued us through the darkness. As we reached the edge of the forest, I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart pounding in my chest as we sought refuge amidst the dense foliage. But even as we hid in the shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the creatures were closing in on us with each passing moment. And then, just as it seemed like we were on the verge of collapse, we stumbled upon it. A cave, nestled deep within the heart of the forest, its entrance concealed by a curtain of vines and foliage. With a sense of relief, we ducked inside, the cool darkness enveloping us like a comforting embrace. But our moment of respite was short-lived, for as we huddled together in the dim light of the cave, a low growl echoed through the darkness, sending shivers down my spine. Without hesitation, I reached for the pistol at my waist, my fingers trembling as I prepared to face whatever horrors awaited us in the depths of the cave. And then, just as we thought we were safe, the creature emerged from the shadows, its massive form filling the entrance to the cave as it snarled and snapped at us with razor-sharp teeth. It was the same creature that had been stalking me earlier, its sleek black feathers ruffled by the gentle breeze as it prepared to strike. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that our small pistol would be no match for a creature of this size and strength. But even as I prepared to make my last stand, a voice cried out from the darkness, a lone figure emerging from the shadows with a heavy tactical crossbow in hand. Without hesitation, my friend grabbed the weapon and took aim, his hand steady despite the fear that threatened to consume him. With a silent prayer, he loosed the bolt, a heavy projectile striking the creature square in the chest with a sickening thud. Even as the creature stumbled backwards with a roar of pain, I knew that our fight was far from over. With a grim determination, I reached for the pistol at my waist, my fingers trembling as I took aim at the creature's head. With a steady hand, I squeezed the trigger, the deafening roar of the gunshot echoing through the darkness as the creature's lifeless body slumped to the ground. With a sigh of relief, we turned and fled deeper into the cave, the sound of raptors hot on our heels as we sought refuge amidst the darkness. But even as we hid in the shadows, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. For out there, in the darkness of the forest, the creatures still lurked, waiting for their next opportunity to strike. And as we huddled together in the dim light of the cave, I couldn't help but wonder what horrors awaited us in the darkness of the night.